The year was 1865, and the frontier air carried both silence and threat. The war back east had ended, but out here, the land knew no peace. The wind swept across the plains with a mournful howl, rattling the clapboard walls of a small cabin that stood alone at the edge of a frozen creek. Inside, Eliza Moore sat hunched near the fire, the dim glow painting hollows into her face. She had not spoken to another soul in 3 years, not since fever took her little boy and a Comanche raid claimed her husband. The world beyond her door was a wilderness of grief and danger, yet she remained, stubbornly tethered to the patch of soil her husband had broken with his own hands. Every board in that cabin told a story. The rocking chair he built for her still creaked in the corner, though no one rocked in it now. The rifle he polished every evening still leaned against the doorframe, though the hands that once cleaned it were long buried beneath the prairie grass. She rose each morning not with hope but with habit, splitting wood, hauling water, tending the meager garden that had somehow survived. Her world had shrunk to the size of the cabin walls, and even the sound of her own voice seemed foreign when she muttered prayers before bed. That evening, the sky turned dark before its time. A storm brewed on the horizon, its clouds bruised with shades of purple and black. Eliza stepped outside, shawl pulled tight against the wind, and studied the vast emptiness. That was when she heard it, a low, rhythmic pounding carried by the gale. Hooves, not one horse, but several, riding hard, drawing near, her breath caught. The nearest settlement lay 50 miles away, and no one visited this far corner of the prairie without reason. She hurried back inside, bolting the door, every muscle taut. The pounding grew louder, the ground itself trembling beneath their approach. Then, through a crack in the shutter, she saw them emerge from the storm. 5 horsemen, massive and dark against a swirl of snow, painted faces, long braids whipped by the wind. Comanche, her pulse hammered in her throat. They reined their horses before her cabin, the animals snorting steam into the frozen air. Rain slicked their shoulders and darkened their buckskin leggings. They looked like figures carved from the wilderness itself, proud, terrible, alive. One dismounted, tall and broad, his hair bound with strips of red cloth. He stepped toward her door, raised his hand, and rapped his knuckles against the wood. Eliza gripped the rifle and raised it. The cabin's silence was broken only by the storm and her own shallow breathing. The knock came again, louder this time. She waited, listening, heart drumming in her ears. A voice followed, low, steady, unfamiliar in its cadence. Words she did not understand. He was speaking Comanche. Another voice joined his, rougher, sharper, and then the unmistakable sound of hunger. A growl of empty stomachs carried even through the barrier of her walls. Her finger brushed the trigger, then eased away. Killing one might buy her a few seconds of survival, but there were 5 of them, and her cabin walls would not stop their fury. She shut her eyes, whispering a name she had not spoken aloud in years. "John, guide me." With trembling hands, she unlatched the door. The wind shoved open, carrying snow and rain inside. 5 pairs of eyes fixed on her, dark and piercing. The leader, the one with red cloth in his hair, stepped forward. His chest rose and fell in deliberate rhythm, his expression unreadable. He pointed to the sky, then to her fire within, then spread his hands. A request, not a threat. Shelter. For a long moment, Eliza said nothing. Her throat ached with unshed tears, her body tight with fear. At last she stepped back, lowering the rifle, though not releasing it. The Comanche entered one by one, ducking to the low doorway, filling the small room with their presence. The air grew heavy with damp leather, hoarse sweat, and smoke. They crowded near the fire, their shadows leaping against the log walls. Eliza retreated to the far side of the room, back pressed against the cupboard. Her fingers traced the worn edge of the rifle's stock. She expected violence, expected the moment when one would lunge and the others would follow. Instead, they crouched near the flames, hands outstretched, their eyes closing as heat returned to their skin. One of them, broad-shouldered, with a scar trailing from his jaw to his collarbone, glanced at her. His gaze lingered, cold and sharp, as if weighing her life against his hunger. Another, younger, with calmer eyes, lifted his chin in acknowledgement. Not quite a smile, but something gentler than the others. His presence unsettled her most of all. The leader spoke again, slow, deliberate. He gestured toward the shelves where dried beans and cornmeal lay in jars. Eliza's stomach twisted. Her stores would not last a winter if she fed 5 grown men. Yet what choice did she have? She moved stiffly, measuring out a portion, her hands clumsy with fear. She set the pot on the fire, watching as steam rose. The Comanche inhaled deeply, their hunger plain. While the food cooked, the cabin filled with silence punctuated by the crackle of flames. The warriors murmured in their language, voices low, words beyond her grasp. Every so often their eyes cut toward her, quick and assessing. Eliza sat rigid in her chair, rifle across her knees, determined not to show weakness. When the food was ready, she ladled it into wooden bowls. They ate with ferocity that startled her, spooning beans into their mouths as if each bite mattered. The younger one paused, looked at her, and with a nod pushed the bowl back before it was empty, leaving a portion. It was a small gesture, but she felt like a hand pressed against her chest. She dipped her head in return, though her lips never softened. As the storm roared outside, the cabin became a world of flickering firelight and shifting shadows. The leader stretched out on a blanket, eyes open, watching her without blinking. 2 of the others dozed, their bodies heavy with exhaustion. The scarred man remained near the door, knife in hand, blade glinting with each movement of fire. The younger one, Tahu, she thought she heard them call him, sat apart, gazing at the flames with quiet intensity. His profile caught the light, revealing youth still etched in his features, though his shoulders carried the weight of battle. Hours passed like years. Eliza's heart never slowed, each beat a reminder she was alive only because they allowed it. Yet beneath the fear, another sensation stirred, an awareness of life around her, human presence she had long forgotten. She hated the comfort it brought. At last the storm eased, the winds howled fading into distant murmurs. The Comanches settled deeper into rest, their breathing heavy. Eliza remained awake, clutching the rifle. Shadows shifted across the walls, and the fire's last embers glowed red. She studied their faces one by one, the leader's commanding stillness, the scarred man's menace, the younger one's quiet restraint. She tried to see their intentions, but all she found was uncertainty. When dawn broke, pale light seeping through the shutters, she rose and stepped outside. The land glistened with frost, the horizon stretching endless and unforgiving. Behind her, 5 men slept in her cabin. Strangers bound to her fate for reasons beyond her choosing. She wrapped her shawl tighter, her breath fogging in the cold air. For years she had lived in silence, carrying her grief like a stone. Now the silence was broken, replaced by the slow, steady rhythm of foreign breathing within her walls. She felt the weight of what had begun, though she could not yet name it. As she turned back toward the cabin, the younger warrior stirred, his eyes opening to meet hers through the doorway. Their gazes locked for a heartbeat, hers wary, his unreadable. Something passed between them, something fragile, dangerous, alive. She drew in a breath and stepped inside, closing the door against the cold. The storm outside had passed, but she knew another storm had only just begun. The pale light of morning crept through the shutters, laying long stripes across the cabin floor. Eliza stirred from her chair, her back aching from the rigid posture she had held through most of the night. The 5 Comanche were awake before her, moving with quiet efficiency, their presence filling the space in ways she still could not reconcile. They were strangers, dangerous men by every definition of frontier law. Yet they acted as if her cabin were a camp they had built themselves. The fire had been rekindled, would replenish without her asking. One knelt near the door, sharpening his knife with slow, deliberate strokes, each rasp of stone against steel crawling up her spine. Her eyes darted from man to man, studying them now in daylight. The leader was unmistakable, his bearing straight, his every movement deliberate. He needed no words to command the others. The scarred warrior by the door radiated menace, his glance quick and sharp, as if he weighed the worth of killing her with every breath. Another, taller but less severe, tended their gear, his hand steady as he mended a torn strap. The 4th was younger, restless, eyes sharp as a hawk's, movements quick, unpredictable. And then there was Tahu, the quiet one with the steady gaze, who last night had spared part his meal. He sat near the hearth, his hands resting on his knees, his eyes drawn to the flames as though fire itself spoke to him. Eliza clutched her rifle, but did not lift it. They had not harmed her, not yet. Yet the unease in her chest grew heavier with each passing moment. The leader rose, pointing to the shells again. He spoke, his tone carrying the weight of request, but edged with the iron of expectation. She understood well enough. They wanted more food. Her stores were already thinning. Her lips pressed tight as she fetched cornmeal and beans. She measured carefully, but one of the younger warriors barked something sharp in Comanche and snatched the scoop from her hand, dumping twice as much into the pot. Eliza's breath caught. She half expected them to strip the shells bare. The knife sharpener smirked at her, a cruel twist to his lips, as if daring her to protest. Her heart hammered, but she did not speak. She was outnumbered, outpowered. Then Tahu murmured something low, his tone even but firm. The leader's eyes cut toward the scar man, who grunted but backed down, resuming his silent sharpening. Eliza caught the shift, subtle yet undeniable. Tahu carried a different kind of strength, less force, more restraint. Her gaze lingered on him longer than she meant to, and when his eyes flicked to hers, she looked away, ashamed of the sudden warmth rising in her chest. They ate quickly, the silence between them punctuated only by spoons scraping bowls. The tension did not ease. Eliza's hands trembled as she cleaned the pot, aware of their eyes on her. Then, without warning, a sound split the air outside, a sharp, guttural howl. Wolves. The horses answered with frantic whinnies. Hooves striking frozen ground. In an instant, the cabin erupted with motion. The warriors surged toward the door, weapons in hand, moving with the fluid unity of men who had fought side by side. Eliza, heart leaping, grabbed her rifle and followed. Outside, the scene was chaos. 2 wolves lunged in the shadows, teeth bared, their fur bristling as they tore at one of the tethered horses. Another circled, eyes glowing yellow in the dawn. The Comanches shouted, their voices sharp commands she could not understand. Arrows loosed into the half-light, striking true, sinking into fur and flesh. One wolf yelped, crumpling in the dirt, but another bounded past, teeth snapping inches from Eliza's skirts. Instinct took hold. She raised a rifle, fired, the shot cracking like thunder. The wolf tumbled, blood staining the snow. Her ears rang, her chest heaved, but her aim had saved her. When it was over, 3 wolves lay dead, their bodies dark against the pale ground. The remaining predators slunk back into the trees, vanishing into silence. The horses shuddered but stood. Eliza lowered the rifle, her arms trembling. The Comanche turned toward her, their expressions unreadable. The scarred man muttered something sharp, almost mocking, but the leader silenced him with a glance. Tahu's eyes held hers for a moment longer, and in them she saw something she had not felt in years. Recognition. They knew she was not helpless. She had proved herself. Back inside, the air was thicker with unspoken words. The men cleaned their weapons, their movements slower now, measured. Eliza sat at the table, her hands wrapped around a tin cup, staring at the flames. She thought of John, of the nights he had stood at that same door with his rifle in hand. She had fought for her land, for her life, and though fear still gnawed at her, pride stirred beneath it. She was not broken yet, but survival was never simple on the frontier. As the sun climbed, the sound of wagon wheels approached, crunching through snow. Eliza stiffened, the cup nearly slipping from her grasp. Through the narrow window, she saw them, settlers, for men on horseback, and 2 wagons trailing behind. Neighbors from 50 miles off, men who rarely ventured near. She knew at once what they must see. Smoke from her chimney, tracks of 5 horses, Comanche prints leading to her door. The Comanche tensed, hands drifting toward their weapons. The scarred man's lip curled, already hungry for blood. Eliza's heart raced. If the settlers and the Comanche clashed here, her cabin would become a killing ground. She stepped to the door, blocking it, her rifle in her hands. The settlers halted outside, rifles across their saddles. Their leader, a thick-set man with a beard matted by frost, called out, "Eliza Moore, you in there?" Her mouth went dry. "I am," she answered, forcing her voice to carry. "You got company." His eyes flicked toward the shadows inside, where the warriors shifted restlessly. "Them ain't welcome on this land. You know that." Eliza's grip tightened. She glanced back. The Comanche watched her, their fates hanging on her next words. The scarred one's teeth glinted in a grin, daring her to choose. The leader's gaze bore into her, waiting. And Tahu's eyes held no demand, only patience, as if he already knew her heart. She faced the settlers again, her chest rising and falling with ragged breaths. "They came in the storm," she said. "Ask for shelter. That's all." "They'll bleed you dry," the bearded man growled. "Best let us take care of them." Eliza swallowed hard, her palms slick on the rifle stock. For years she had lived with grief as her only company, silence as her only guard. But now 5 lives, savage or not, rested on her voice. She remembered the wolves, remembered the arrow that had flown past her shoulder, remembered the young man who had left her food in her bowl when he was hungry himself. Her spine straightened. "They stay," she said. A ripple of disbelief swept through the settlers. The bearded man spat into the snow. "You'll regret that." He jerked his reins, and the men wheeled their horses, casting one last look before riding off, wheels grinding against frozen ruts. Their figures dwindled against the horizon until the land swallowed them whole. Eliza lowered her rifle, her knees weak. Behind her, the Comanche murmured in their tongue. The scarred one sneered but said nothing more. The leader gave a single nod, a gesture of acknowledgement that carried more weight than any words. Tahu's gaze met hers again, steady and unflinching. Something unspoken passed between them. Gratitude, perhaps, or a promise. She could not tell which, but it lingered in her chest long after she turned away. The day waned, the storm's remnants melting under the pale sun. Inside the cabin, the air was no longer heavy with the threat of violence, but something far more complex. Eliza felt the shift, subtle but undeniable. These men were no longer just intruders. They were bound to her now by survival, by blood spilled together, by the stand she had taken at her door. She did not know what tomorrow would bring, but tonight she would not eat alone. And as she sat near the fire, the glow casting warmth against her weary face, she allowed herself, for the first time in years, to feel something she thought had died with her husband and child. Not hope, not yet, but the faint stirrings of it, fragile as a flame in the wind. The wolves were gone, the settlers too, but the true storm had only begun to gather, silent and unseen, in the spaces between their breaths. Night fell heavy on the plains, swallowing the horizon in its endless black. The cabin stood like a solitary sentinel against the darkness, firelight flickering through its cracks, painting narrow stripes on the frozen earth. Inside, the air was taut, charged with something that felt less like safety and more like the tightening of a rope before it snapped. Eliza felt it in her bones. For days the Comanche had shared her roof, and though no hand had risen against her, the weight of their presence pressed harder with each passing hour. They were bound by necessity, not trust, and necessity had a way of wearing thin. The men settled into their corners, sharpening blades, mending gear, trading low words in their own tongue. Their leader remained still, watchful as ever, his eyes like iron in the fire's glow. The scarred warrior leaned against the door, knife in hand, flicking the blade in a rhythm that grated against Eliza's nerves. The youngest, restless and sharp-eyed, shifted often, pacing like a caged wolf. Tahu alone seemed anchored, seated near the fire, his gaze calm, steady, as though he could see beyond the cabin walls to something none of the others could. Eliza busied herself with tasks that no longer needed doing, rearranging shelves, folding blankets already folded. Her hands craved work to mask her unease, but her thoughts betrayed her. She had stood with these men when settlers came. She had shared her food, her fire. She had seen Tahu's eyes soften, had felt the silence between them grow heavy with meaning. Yet doubt gnawed at her. What if all she had done meant nothing? What if they were waiting patient as wolves, for the moment her guard slipped. The unease broke with a single sound, a soft whistle, almost lost in the wind outside. Eliza froze. It was not the call of a night bird, nor the howl of a coyote. It was human, deliberate, meant to summon. Her eyes darted to the scarred man. He did not look at her, but the corner of his mouth curved in the shadow of a smile. He rose slowly, slipped through the door without a word. The leader's gaze tracked him, unreadable, but he made no move to stop him. Eliza's heart hammered. Betrayal had a sound, and she had just heard it. Moments later, the night erupted. Hooves thundered. Voices carried sharp on the cold air. The crack of rifles split the silence. Raiders, more Comanche, drawn by the scarred man's signal, descending on a cabin like vultures on carrion. The leader barked orders, his voice like stone striking steel. The men leapt into motion. Tahu grabbed his bow, string taut in a heartbeat, arrows flashing in the firelight. Eliza raised her rifle, her fingers clumsy with fear, but she forced the barrel steady. The first raider burst through the door, teeth bared, blade raised. Eliza fired. The shot struck his chest, the recoil slamming her shoulder back. He fell heavy to the floor, eyes wide in shock. The cabin became a storm of chaos. Smoke, shouting, the ring of steel against steel. Raiders pushed through the door, hacking, slashing. The leader met them with a tomahawk, each swing brutal, final. The restless young warrior fought with wild speed, blades flashing, but he cried out as a knife found his side. Blood spattered the floor, hot against Eliza's skin. Tahu moved like the wind, his arrows flying true, each strike finding its mark. When his quiver emptied, he seized a fallen spear, driving into the chest of another attacker. His calm had vanished, replaced by a fire that burned in every movement. Eliza found herself drawn to him even amid the carnage, as though his very presence was a shield against despair. The scarred betrayer returned in the fray, eyes gleaming with triumph as raiders poured in behind him. He locked eyes with Eliza, a grin splitting his face, and lunged. She raised her rifle, but the hammer clicked on an empty chamber. Panic flared. Before his blade could fall, Tahu was there, intercepting, the clash of steel ringing through the cabin. They fought close, brutal, the betrayer's knife slashing, Tahu's spear thrusting. Eliza staggered back, fumbling to reload, her hands trembling so violently she nearly dropped the powder. The fight surged into every corner. The leader roared, cutting men down with grim precision. The restless youth bled heavily, yet he still swung his blade, refusing to fall. Eliza rammed the ball into the rifle, snapped it shut, and aimed once more. She fired into the press of bodies, the shot tearing through betrayer's shoulder, staggering him. Tahu seized the moment, driving the spear through his chest. The scarred man gasped, eyes wide, then crumpled to the blood-soaked floor. But the raiders kept coming. Flames licked the cabin walls as a lantern toppled, fire racing up the wood. Smoke thickened, choking. Eliza coughed, eyes stinging. Her world narrowed to flashes of steel and fire. She stumbled, nearly trampled, until a hand seized hers, Tahu's rough, strong. He pulled her upright, his voice urgent though she could not understand the words. His meaning was clear enough. Live. They fought their way toward the door, bodies colliding, blood spraying. The leader held the line, his tomahawk rising and falling like the toll of a bell. The young warrior collapsed, his blade slipping from his grasp, his life spilling into the dirt. Eliza's throat tightened, grief for a man whose name she did not know. But there was no time to mourn. They burst into the night, the cold air biting, stars sharp above. Raiders circled, shadows against the burning glow of the cabin. Tahu pulled her behind the trough, arrows hissing past. He rose, loosed a shaft from a fallen bough, struck a rider from his horse. Eliza reloaded, the motions clumsy but desperate. She fired again, the recoil jarred her teeth, but the raider fell. She felt no triumph, only survival. The fight raged until the last raider fled, disappearing into the black horizon. The cabin roared with fire, beams collapsing inward, sparks showering into the night. The land smelled of blood and smoke, the silence broken only by the crackle of flames and the ragged breaths of the living. Eliza sank to her knees, rifle slipping from her grasp. Her chest heaved, her arms heavy. She looked around. 2 of the 5 Comanche lay dead. The leader stood bloody but unbroken, his chest rising like a mountain in the firelight. Tahu knelt near her, his shoulder bleeding where an arrow had torn flesh. Yet his eyes sought hers, steady even in pain. She reached for him without thinking, pressing her shawl against the wound. His skin burned beneath her touch, his breath catching, but he did not pull away. Their eyes met, and in that moment words were unnecessary. They fought side by side, bled together, survived. Whatever chasm had once divided them had narrowed, if only for this night. When dawn came, the cabin was nothing but blackened timbers and smoke curling into the pale sky. Eliza stood amidst the ruins, her hands raw, her heart hollow. Everything John had built, everything she had clung to, was gone. Yet she was alive. More than alive. She was no longer alone. The leader approached her, his gaze heavy with meaning. He spoke, the words foreign but the tone clear. Respect, acknowledgement, a bond forged in blood. He gestured toward the horizon, where the plain stretched endless and uncertain. It was not a command, not quite an invitation, but something between. Tahu stepped forward, his face pale with pain but his eyes unyielding. He touched his chest, then gestured to her, then to the horizon. Come. Eliza's throat tightened. Behind her lay ashes and ghosts. Before her, the unknown. She had lived in silence for years, her heart locked in grief. But here, now, choice pressed on her like a weight. She could stay in the ruins, clinging to the past, or she could step forward into something terrifying and alive. Her voice cracked as she spoke, the first true words she had given in years. Not yet. Tahu studied her, then nodded, slow and solemn. He understood. The leader gave a short command, and the surviving warriors mounted their horses. Tahu lingered a heartbeat longer, his eyes never leaving hers, before he too swung into the saddle. They rode into horizon, their figures shrinking against the endless land, until only the wind remained. Eliza stood alone once more, but it was a different solitude than before. Her grief had not vanished, but had shifted, reshaped by fire and blood. She looked at the rising sun, at the smoke drifting into the sky, and for the first time in years, she felt the stir of something that might one day be hope. Her voice was low, meant only for the wind, but steady. I'll live. And the frontier, vast and unforgiving, seemed to whisper back its answer.